there.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. It's good to meet you. My name's Ben. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course, of course. I'm a big fan of yours and your work on this series. So excited to really dig into it. But I guess just for starters, congrats on the recent award nominations. Reservation Dogs was nominated for Outstanding New Series. You were recognized with a nomination as well for your performance. So what's it been like now that season one has wrapped? And are you in the room for season two yet? Have you started production on that?
So we have started. We're about in our sixth or seventh week in the writers' room for season two. So we've been up to many shenanigans and seeing what the Reservation Dogs are going to be up to in season two. So that's
Very
been
exciting. Well,
very
what's
exciting.
it been like for you just to be on the receiving end of a project like this? You've been acting professionally for some years now, but I think it's fair to say this is kind of a mainstream leading role that you haven't seen before. So what's just the last few months been like for you?
It's been such a whirlwind. I mean, we only finished, like, we wrapped shooting maybe end of May, early June. So the whole season's come out since then. We've gotten to present at the Emmys and represent our communities back home. But also now we've started on season two. We've been greenlit. So it's like, it feels really exciting and really great, and also a little bit like whiplash just because it's all happening so fast.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. And I would love to hear a bit more just about how you got your start in the writer's room. That's a pretty unique journey to go from leading a series and then you're invited into the writer's room. So what was that conversation like with the creators for you to step behind the camera in that creative space?
So the native film industry is so tiny, where so many people who have been a part of Reservation Dogs, but also beyond, have been working at kicking this door down and getting Indigenous stories seen and heard. And one of the people doing that was Sterlin Harjo, who I knew from the independent film circuit. And
Hmm.
we've known of each other forever, like many Indigenous creatives in the industry do. And luckily, he knew me as a filmmaker even before we started working together on Reservation Dogs. He had known me from a project that I'd done with Jeff Barnaby called Rhymes for Young Ghouls, which was my
Hmm.
first leading role. But also he knew of my short films that I had written and directed and produced. And when the time came to audition for Reservation Dogs, and I didn't want to be like weird about it and be like, hey, yeah, like I know we know each other, but like I want to be in your show. But
Hmm.
I had kind of worked my way up I guess like the good old fashioned way of auditioning and doing callbacks, all of the more self tapes, until we ended up all meeting for the network test in LA. But since then, Sterlin has been huge, and I'm so grateful for him for fighting for me in being a creative
Hmm.
behind the camera as well as in front of the camera. And I was expecting to launch into a whole pitch of maybe I could be in the writer's room, and I'm like, I'm gonna send you my samples and all this stuff, and he's just like, nah, dude, like come in, like you're
Right,
gonna
let's
be in
do
the
it.
room. And it was just like it was a wild moment, but I'm so appreciative, and he's just like been so awesome, not only to myself but to so many creatives on Reservation Dogs that are getting their first television break.
Yeah, yeah, it's great to see, just as an audience member, the spotlight that this series is able to shine in terms of Indigenous representation. I know that you've also spoken of your pride to showcase queer representation on screen. I'm curious what when it comes to the actual choosing of what you want to put your work behind, how does that idea of representation impact what you decide to do and not do in terms of a creator and actor?
I would say that above all else, I look for stories that excite me as an audience member, or ones that I'd be curious to see. But there are certain things that I'll veer away from, like certain tropes, whether it's towards Indigenous women venturing into the like Pocahontas stereotype,
Hmm.
or with queer folks with queer baiting, or like the barrier gaze trope. Like I, while I try and venture away from those stereotypes and traps that writers in the industry fall into, it also depends on who the creators are, and if it's taking a different look at that, and if it's coming from queer and indigenous filmmakers and voices at the helm. That I think is also something that's a component of what I look for in the work that I'm choosing to do.
Yeah, yeah. There's this whole idea behind like own voices, that being able to tell your own stories, and that's so important when you're dealing with ideas of representation or marginalized communities. But yeah, again, it's great to see you and the whole Reservation Dogs team getting out there and doing that. I'd love to hear a bit more too about you mentioned that the Indigenous creative community where you come from, it's very small. A lot of you know each other. What were the resources that you had growing up in terms of the performing arts? Like how did you even get your start and decide to pursue this professionally?
It was a long, winding journey, and I actually tried to pursue another career entirely.
Okay.
But I just couldn't stay away. I love film and TV too much. But I grew up on my reservation, Kahnawake Mohawk Territory, which is up in Canada. It borders Montreal, which is a major city. But I kind of had the best of both worlds, where I grew up surrounded by community and culture, but then I also had access to resources in Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
But I had my start always wanting to be an actor, being such a huge fan of movies. Some of my favorites were like Matilda and Harriet the Spy growing up.
Mm-hmm. I'll still revisit those ones. That's great.
and I ended up taking part in the Turtle Island Theater Company, which was a local community theater on my res. And my debut role was a munchkin in The Wizard of Oz as part of the Lullaby League.
Okay.
So I didn't have any formal experience, and even now I never attended theater school or drama school, namely in part because I didn't think that there was a clear path, or that even having a career as an actor would be possible. Like, I was this Mohawk kid on a res, and also I was an English speaker in the middle of a French province. And
Mm-hmm.
so I thought there was no way in hell that I would be able to do it. And I'd never seen that path laid out before me. There were like movies like Pocahontas and Indian in the Cupboard and Dances with Wolves, and there just like weren't projects that actually featured our stories. And so
Right.
instead of pursuing acting, I thought, well, if I can't pursue my first passion, what would I want to do with my life? And that was to help Indigenous people. And so that's when I studied, technically I'm certified to be a corrections officer.
All right.
Although that wasn't what I wanted to do. The program was called Youth and Adult Correctional Intervention. But it was in the hopes towards becoming a social worker. And I was working at the Native Women's Shelter of Montreal for a brief period of time where I had interned. But it was around that time where I had nearly given up on acting. I had been cast in a few roles here and there, but it was nothing significant. But it was then that I had auditioned for Rancheria and Ghouls, which was written and directed by Jeff Barnaby and actually filmed on my reserve. That it had changed everything for me, and that was my first leading role, and I just got sucked right back in, and I knew in my bones that I couldn't do anything else with my life other than film and TV, and now it's my hopes that it's through acting and writing and creating that not only can I help bring our stories to the screen, but also am able to help Indigenous people and all of our rights and issues and everything that concerns us through this medium.
Right. I mean, that desire to be an advocate through activism, that doesn't go away, but you just find a different way to marry the two passions. That's great. Well, as a final question for you then, especially speaking of the fact that you didn't see a through line or a clear path to get to where you are today, what advice do you have for other young performers out there, whether they be themselves of a marginalized identity or just people who want to break into Hollywood and don't see a clear path? How did you kind of go about charting yourself and sticking to your guns? What advice would you give to other people looking to do that?
There's a couple different things. For me, I I had to love it. And it was very much like getting involved in community theater, taking a couple of acting classes here and there, and then also reaching out to agents. I know sometimes if you don't have enough experience, then agents will have you audition for them, but they will become your advocate in helping you find auditions and things like that. Also, especially if you're starting out, like, find out what you like, find out what you're into, what stories speak to you, what characters are you drawn to and why. And for me, that was a huge moment in helping me shape the scope of what I wanted to do. And the more specific you can get, the more direct of a path you'll find. When a director had asked me, like, well, what are some of your dream roles? I was like, I have no idea. Nobody's ever asked me this before. And I was just more, I had been more inclined to just accept whatever I could get. But I had taken that time to understand what stories resonated with me and why. And that ended up helping me become a writer and figure out what stories I wanted to tell, but also help me with acting and understanding why I was doing it and what I wanted to say in the world and what kind of characters. And there could be for any reason. It could be like just because it's cool and fun and I idolized these kinds of movies as a kid.
Yeah.
And from there, like, keep working towards that, and above all else, make sure that you're doing it for yourself, like whether it's pursuing the career as a whole, or even if it's doing the scene, that you're acting in the scene for your own satisfaction, as opposed to guessing whatever you think this casting director or director might want, because your work will always be watered down if that's the case.
Yeah. All great little nuggets to leave our audience with today. Thank you for joining us, and it's been great just to get to know you a bit. I'm excited to see what season 2 has in store.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. I see all of your great comments. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.